lives and to protect livelihoods.
Absolutely. Well, Mr. Speaker, I want to join my honourable friend in paying tribute to the staff at Stoke Mandeville, but to all the staff in our fantastic NHS for the way they're coping at this extremely difficult time. And he can certainly take it that we're not only, of course, we've not only put another £5 billion into the NHS last week, as he heard from my right honourable friend, but we will certainly do whatever it takes and provide whatever funding is necessary to help our NHS through this crisis, and indeed to support the whole country with government guaranteed loans, as you will have heard yesterday.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank you for the statement you just made and for the very responsible approach MPs have taken to today's question time by sitting a suitable distance apart to avoid cross-fertilisation of this horrible disease. I also want to join the Prime Minister in paying tribute to Lance Corporal Brodie Gillen, who was killed in Iraq last week. Our thoughts are with her family and her friends. Today, Mr. Speaker, people are mourning the loss of loved ones. Many more will be suffering from the effects of coronavirus, including those already losing work or losing their jobs and worried about whether they can keep a roof over their head. Our greatest thanks must go to the frontline medical and public health staff who are fighting to combat the spread of the disease, and to the public servants, postal workers in particular, who've given such sacrifices today, and cleaners who are providing vital support. We must also thank those working around the clock to make sure our shops and warehouses are stocked with the essential food supplies that everybody needs. We on these benches will do our duty to hold the government to account. Together we need to ensure that the most effective action is taken to protect people, and it's in that spirit that I ask questions of the Prime Minister today. Every member of the public will make sacrifices in the effort to stop the spread of coronavirus, but those on low pay, self-employed workers and small business owners are understandably worried. Sue wrote to me this week. Her family is in isolation and says the current £94.25 per week statutory sick pay is not enough to pay for the food shopping. Can the Prime Minister do what the Chancellor repeatedly refused to do yesterday and pledge to increase statutory sick pay to European levels?
Prime Minister.
Well, I want to thank the right honourable gentleman for the way in which the opposition has been approaching this issue generally, and for the cooperation that has so far taken place between our front benches in this matter, because it is, as he rightly says, this is a national emergency, and we're asking the public to do things, to take actions in a way that is really unprecedented for a government in peacetime, and perhaps even unprecedented in the last century. So, to come to his question, it is only right that when we are asking people to take action to isolate themselves if they have the disease or a member of their household has the disease, if we're asking the public to take steps which jeopardise businesses, cause people to risk losing their jobs, it is absolutely right that whatever their circumstances, we should ensure that workers get the support that they need. So in addition to the package of business support that my right honourable friend the Chancellor outlined yesterday, we will be working with the unions, working with colleagues across the House. We will be bringing forward further measures to support workers of all kinds throughout this crisis.
Jeremy Corbyn.
The UK sick pay levels lag far behind those of European counterparts. The Scandinavian countries are giving many of them 100% of wages during this crisis, and I hope that when the Prime Minister brings forward proposals on this, they do reflect the reality of people's lives. You cannot feed a family on 90-odd quid a week, and those people, therefore, are putting everybody at risk because they have to go out to work in order to put food on the table. And to claim statutory sick pay, workers need to prove they earn a minimum of £118 per week. So I hope when the Prime Minister brings forward proposals, he will give confidence to the millions of people who work on low-income jobs, are in insecure work or self-employed, and commit to extending a very much enhanced statutory sick pay to all workers.
Yes.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I've told the House before, of course we will ensure that nobody is penalised for doing the right thing and protecting not just themselves but also other members of society, and of course making sure that our NHS is able to cope. And clearly statutory sick pay will typically be supplemented by other benefits, but we will ensure, and I just repeat what I said to the Right Honourable Gentleman, we will ensure, since the state is after all making these demands of the public and of business, it is only right that throughout this period we should be doing whatever it takes to support the workers of this country throughout this crisis.
Jeremy Corbyn.
What it takes is a recognition of the social injustice and inequalities that exist in this country. And I hope that when the Prime Minister makes the proposals on statutory sick pay levels, that will be recognised. A quarter of the people that are most crucial to support us in this crisis, social care staff, and almost half of home care workers, are on 0 hours contracts, so therefore automatically not entitled to sick pay. By not extending statutory sick pay to all workers, the government is forcing social care staff, and they're the people that could unwittingly be transmitting the disease amongst the most vulnerable in our community, to choose between health and their own hardship. Yesterday, the Chancellor, unfortunately, offered nothing to the 20 million people living in rented homes, including 3 million households with children. They're worried sick that they can't pay their rent if they get ill, lose pay, or feel they need to self-isolate. It is in the interest of public health, of the health of all of us, that people don't feel forced to go to work in order to avoid eviction when they know themselves they may be spreading this terrible disease. So will the Prime Minister now confirm that the government's emergency legislation will protect private renters from eviction?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can indeed confirm that. I mean, he's making a series of very powerful points, and I can indeed confirm that we will be bringing forward legislation to protect private renters from eviction. That is one thing we'll do. But it's also important, as we legislate, that we do not simply pass on the problem. So we'll also be taking steps to protect other actors in the economy.
Prime Minister, Jeremy Corbyn.
Seeing the details of that, because all of us represent private sector tenants in our constituencies, and we know the stress they're going through now. They need something said urgently about this, and so I hope the government will say something as soon as possible. Today would be appropriate. NHS staff and those working in the care sector are, Mr. Speaker, on the front line of caring for patients suffering from coronavirus. However, sadly, those workers have no idea if they're actually transmitting the virus themselves. They may not be obviously suffering from it, but they could still be transmitting it. And if they're ill or not, and when they return to work on the front line, what effect it will have. So can the Prime Minister please explain why the government isn't prioritising the testing of all healthcare staff, both those in the NHS and those doing such a vital job in the care sector?
Well, Mr. Speaker, in point of fact, we are prioritising testing of NHS staff for the obvious reason that we want them to be able to look after everybody else with confidence that they're not transmitting the disease. And this country is actually far ahead of many other comparable countries in testing huge numbers of people. We're increasing our tests from 5,000 to 10,000 a day, and it may be of interest to the House to know that we are getting much closer, Mr. Speaker, to having a generally available test which will determine whether or not you have had the disease, and that will truly be of huge benefit to this country in tackling the outbreak. Jeremy
Corbyn.
The World Health Organization said test, test, test. And we should be testing, I believe, on an industrial scale. When I met the Prime Minister on Monday evening, he assured me that there were 10,000 tests per day going on. That's better than none, obviously, but it is nowhere near even the number of people working in the NHS and the care sector. It is a massive undertaking, and I wish there was a greater sense of urgency from the government in getting this testing available for all staff. NHS staff are obviously on the front line, and many are scared because the guidance that has been changed to say they do not need to wear full protective equipment when caring for patients. A senior doctor has said, and I quote, "The rest of the world is providing staff with full protective gear and we're restricting it." And this is a doctor saying, "I'm scared." We shouldn't be scaring doctors and nurses. Is there a policy for them to have full protective equipment or not? Because I believe it should be the case.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're just quickly on testing, just to reassure him, we're moving up to 25,000 a day. And on PPE equipment for NHS staff, he's absolutely right to raise this, and this is of huge concern, obviously, to everyone, that our NHS staff should feel that they're able to interact with patients with perfect security and protection. So there is a massive effort going on, comparable to the effort to build enough ventilators to ensure that we have adequate supplies of PPE equipment, not just now, but throughout the outbreak.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, generations to come will look back on this moment and they will judge us on the actions that we take now. Our response must be bold and it must be decisive. The market cannot deliver what is needed. Only collective public action led by government can protect our people and our society. And that collective action must not allow the burden to fall most on those who lack the resources to cope, as happened after the financial crash. People across the country they do understand the need for temporary restrictions on our way of life to protect us all, and we will work with the government. But the Prime Minister must understand that will require balancing action to protect the most insecure and vulnerable in the interests of public health as well as of social justice. The health of us all depends on the health of the most vulnerable. So I ask the Prime Minister, will he step up now and not tomorrow and give support to those vulnerable people who live on the margins of our society, are vulnerable themselves and make us all vulnerable, and give them the support and the assurance that they desperately are searching for today?
Indeed, I can, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we've announced another 500 million to go straight into councils to help them immediately with the needs of the poorest and most vulnerable. That's why we've announced immediate cash injections into business to help them through unquestionably a very, very difficult time. That's why we will be bringing forward further measures to ensure that every worker receives support throughout this difficult period. Because no doubt, Mr. Speaker, we are asking, he's right to draw attention to the unprecedented nature of this crisis. We are asking the public to do quite extraordinary things. And we're asking business to shoulder quite extraordinary burdens. But the more effectively we can work together to comply with the very best scientific advice, which is what has actuated this government throughout the crisis, which is what has guided this government throughout the crisis, the better our chances of relieving the burden on the NHS. The more lives we will save, the more suffering we will avoid, and the quicker we will get through it. And be in no doubt that this is, and the Right Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right, this is an enormous challenge for this country. But I think the people of this country understand what they need to do to beat it. And they also, I think, understand that we will beat it and that we will beat it together.
Brendan Clark-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In November, the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care came to visit us at Bassett Law Hospital in Worksop to see the excellent work done by our local NHS. and we were delighted to hear of a £14.9 million investment in upgrading our accident and emergency department. Would the Prime Minister please update us on the progress of this, and would he and the Secretary of State accept an invitation to see the work once it is completed?
Mr. Speaker, well, I congratulate my honourable friend on what he's doing for Bassetlaw Hospital. Actually, I remember going to talk to the wonderful doctors and staff at Bassetlaw, and they explained in great detail their fascinating plan for improving service for their patients, and I am absolutely determined to support him and them in their ambitions. That's why we've put £15 million already into expanding emergency care capacity in Bassetlaw, and my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, is working, I know, intimately with Bassetlaw to take forward the whole project.
Ian Blackford. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister on the killing of Lance Corporal Brodie Gillen? Mr. Speaker, this is an unprecedented emergency, and it requires an unprecedented response. I welcome the fact that parties across this House and governments across these islands have worked together as we attempt to protect all our peoples. It is the right approach, and it is the very least the public expect and deserve from us. Yesterday, the Chancellor announced a £330 billion financial package for business. Today, the UK Government needs to announce a financial package for people. Members from 6 parties across this House have now expressed support for a temporary universal basic income to help everyone, especially freelancers, renters and the self-employed. Using the current tax system, will the Prime Minister stand up today and give a commitment to provide people with the security of a universal basic income?
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, I want to thank the right honourable gentleman for the spirit in which he's spoken, and indeed there is a huge amount of collaboration going across all 4 nations of this country, as you can imagine, Mr. Speaker, and we are in lockstep. What I would just say on his appeal for a basic income: do not underestimate, Mr. Speaker, the value to people of the measures that we've already announced that will support business and keep jobs going, make sure that those businesses continue in existence. That must be the first step. But then, as I've said repeatedly now to the Right Honourable Leader of the Opposition, it is also, he's quite right, it is also important that throughout this crisis we take steps to support workers, and the suggestion that he makes is, of course, one of many such suggestions.
Ian Blackford.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for his answer? And there's a willingness from all of us to work together as we go through this crisis. But, Mr. Speaker, thousands of people are already losing their jobs. It's happening today. Millions will face the same threat. They need reassurance and support, and they need it today. They need an income guarantee. Prime Minister, we must not repeat history. People are worried about their bills. They are worried about keeping a roof over their head. In the last financial crisis, the banks were bailed out, but ordinary people were not. Prime Minister, you have it within your power to protect people's incomes and provide them with peace of mind. At this time, an emergency universal income scheme would do just that. Will the Prime Minister, at the very least, to commit to meeting all of us who support this proposal and discuss how we can protect the incomes of all of our peoples?
Well done, Ian.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. I can make that commitment, and indeed I said as much in my earlier answer to the right honourable gentleman. I think it is very important as we go forward that we try and enlist a consensus in this House about how to support people throughout the crisis. And I agree profoundly with what he said about not repeating history. It is very important that as we ask the public to do the right thing for themselves and for everybody else, that no one, whatever their income, should be penalised for doing the right thing. And we will make sure that that is the case.
Can I welcome confirmation that routine Ofsted inspections will be postponed? And will the Prime Minister join in commending schools, leaders and teachers for all they've been doing in supporting families through this crisis?
Mr. Speaker, I want to pay a particular tribute, not just, of course, to our amazing NHS, but also to our teachers and everybody who works in our schools, for everything that they have done to keep our schools going throughout this difficult crisis so far. And, of course, we will do everything we can to remove burdens on schools, and Ofsted is one in particular that we can address. And the House should expect further decisions to be taken imminently on schools and how to make sure that we square the circle, both of making sure that we stop the spread of the disease, but also of making sure that we relieve as much as we can pressure on our NHS.
To Rasool Nalan Khan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My NHS colleagues on the front line are already stressed with the pressure that they face. Last night, I visited my father in a care home and am acutely aware that I may have fed him for the very last time. We are in unprecedented times. I would like to know, where was the forward planning for PPE for our NHS and care staff? Where is the testing for medics? Why are we waiting so long for mass testing? And why are social distancing measures merely just suggestions? Prime Minister, it is right that we have all put party loyalty aside to work together during this time of national crisis, but we must scale up the response. Without good leadership, people in this country will start to panic. There must be no more time for delay. The time to act is now.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I completely agree with what the honourable lady says, and I thank her for all the work that she does in the health service. And I can certainly tell her that we have stockpiles of PPE equipment, and we are proceeding, and it's very, very important for the House to understand this, we are proceeding in accordance with the best scientific advice. And it is the timeliness of those measures that is absolutely vital in combating the spread of the epidemic. And indeed, that is how you save lives. And I'm delighted that the UK's approach has been commended not just by Neil Ferguson of Imperial College today, but also by Dr. David Nabarro of the World Health Organization.
Edward Timpson.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. The weeks and months ahead will test us all and stretch society to its limits. None more so than the National Health Service, which is working day and night to care for the sick and save lives. But together, Mr. Speaker, we will get through this. So will my right honourable friend update the House on his efforts to bring together a coalition of manufacturers to supply the NHS with the ventilators and other essential medical equipment it needs to treat the most adversely affected patients during this pandemic?
Mr. Speaker, as the House will know, there is already a coalition of British manufacturers who are now working together at speed to supply the ventilators that we need. We already have 8,000. We're moving rapidly upwards, and I will keep the House informed on developments.
Chris Bryant, close question.
Number 8, Mr. Speaker.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for his invitation, and I'm happy to consider his invitation to run, and we'll take it up.
Get down. Well, what I really hope is that the Prime Minister will look at the whole of the coronavirus crisis through the eyes of the Rhondda. Because we have a large number of sole traders, chippies, electricians and plumbers. We've got a lot of people in very insecure employment. We've got lots of people who are elderly and people who are on very low incomes and have next to no savings. Many people have already been laid off this week and are worried that they're going to be laid off in the next fortnight. So we really do need the Prime Minister to address these matters. And if I'm honest, I don't want to be partisan, but it does feel as if we're a bit of an afterthought. So I really, really beg the Prime Minister to look through the eyes of the Rhondda, because I think he would then double sick pay so that it's a sensible figure. I think he would introduce something like a summer version of the winter fuel allowance so that the elderly get some help. I think he would probably introduce some kind of VAT holiday for sole traders. I know he hopes, and we all hope, that the whole of the country will bounce back quickly after this. But I say to him, after the floods and the poverty that we have historically suffered in the Rhondda, communities like mine will find it phenomenally difficult to bounce back if he doesn't take this kind of action now.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman speaks powerfully and passionately, and in my view, wholly rightly for the people of the Rhondda. And I can tell you that our thoughts in this government are with the people of this entire country in helping everyone to get through this virus. And we will do, as I say, whatever it takes, both to support business, and as I said in my earlier answer to the Right Honourable Gentleman Leader of the Opposition, also to support individuals and families. And I welcome the suggestion, the agreement of the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Scottish National Party, that we should do this on a cross-party basis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Member of Parliament for Grenfell Tower, I would like to thank my right honourable friend for the additional £1 billion in the budget for cladding remediation. Moving on to today's events, can my right honourable friend assure me that his government will do absolutely everything to support the economy, businesses large and small, the self-employed, individuals, including those on low income, because now is not the time to be squeamish about public sector debt.
Mr. Speaker, I can certainly give my honourable friend that reassurance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the measures, but yesterday's statement offered nothing for the self-employed. My constituency in Vauxhall has an estimated 30,000 self-employed workers, and a lot of those people are already feeling the financial pinch now. And they can't wait for days for the government to announce something. So will the Prime Minister today announce a guarantee of measures that will fully compensate all self-employed workers in this crisis?
Mr. Speaker, I repeat the answer I've given several times to several of her colleagues. We will do whatever it takes to ensure that all workers are protected throughout this crisis.
Stephen Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to, like so many colleagues, extend my thanks to the NHS and all the frontline staff, but also offer my thanks to him, the Chancellor and the Health Secretary for their leadership in this crisis. I think it's warmly welcomed by many in my constituency. The news from the major food retailers this morning was welcome, but many over 70s, vulnerable and self-isolating, will be concerned that they will still have problems about access to food and to medicines throughout this period. Could he confirm what the government is doing to ensure that all retailers and pharmacists are going to prioritise these groups throughout the whole of this virus crisis?
Mr. Speaker, we're extending the hours in which deliveries can be made, and we're talking right now with the Pharmaceutical Services Negotiating Committee about ensuring that pharmaceutical goods get at the right time to the customers who need them.
Neil Hanby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In response to COVID-19, there are reports from across the globe of antiretroviral drugs being tested alone and in combination with varying degrees of reported success. In light of this, can the Prime Minister advise the House what resources are being made for drug security, development and clinical trials in the UK? What efforts are being made by him for the UK to work in concert internationally? And does he agree with me that the prize on this occasion must be the victory and not patents and profits?
I endorse completely the sentiment that he has just expressed, Mr. Speaker, about the need to do this collectively. The government's announced a £46 million package of investment in finding a vaccine. A huge amount of work, as I've just said, is going into investing in test kits, and those are changing the whole time and improving the whole time. And we are doing this. The House will be reassured to know that this is being done at an international level, working with our EU partners, working with the G7, the G20, the WHO, the IMF. Everybody is working together on the very issues that he addresses.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my right honourable friend has said, combating this virus will require a huge national effort. Supporting doctors and nurses in hospitals and community carers looking after the most elderly in their homes. Can the Prime Minister assure me and my constituents watching and listening in Warrington South that this government will do all it can to save lives, protect frontline NHS staff, and keep the most vulnerable people in our society safe?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, he identifies exactly the three priorities of this government.
Stephen Farray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Defeating the coronavirus must be the top, indeed the only priority for the foreseeable future. There's already huge anxiety across the UK. Businesses are facing unprecedented challenge and uncertainty. So regardless of leave or remain, how quickly will the Prime Minister recognise the inevitable and seek at least a one-year extension to the Brexit implementation process?
Mr. Speaker, our priority is to deal with the coronavirus epidemic, and the other matter that he mentions has already, as he will know, been legislated for.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like other town centres across the UK, Burnley has been seeing the evolution of its high street by mixing retail with leisure, which plays a significant role in increasing footfall and supporting SMEs. With that in mind, can I thank the Prime Minister and my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, for the measure as announced in the budget and yesterday? And will he commit to doing whatever it takes to supporting our SMEs so once we get through this challenge, our high streets can buzz once again?
Yes. Mr. Speaker, I can indeed confirm that is exactly why we have cut business rates, and that's why we're making very considerable sums available for small businesses, and indeed for very small businesses, precisely to protect the high street and the enterprise environment on which so many jobs depend.
Cavan Jones.
I'm sure the Prime Minister will agree with me that protecting our NHS staff at this crucial time is our maximum importance. This week in County Durham, at least one GP surgeon received surgical masks from the NHS with expiry dates of 2016 on the box. In other cases, boxes, labels have been stuck over the extending the expiry dates of those boxes. What assurance can the Prime Minister give, not only that they get the equipment they require, that it's actually effective once they get it?
Mr. Speaker, to the best of my knowledge, all the equipment we're sending out is of the correct standard. I'd be happy to look at the case that he mentions, and as I said earlier to the House, we currently have stockpiles of PPE, but are making huge efforts to make sure we have enough for the outbreak ahead.
Sarah Dines.
The Chancellor yesterday unveiled a wide range of measures to tackle coronavirus. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that it's vital we do whatever we can to get through this as a country?
Mr. Speaker, I wholly endorse what my honourable friend has said. We will do whatever it takes and we will beat it together.
Apart from rent arrears, eviction from a private tenancy, a Section 21 no-fault eviction, is the biggest reason for homelessness. On Friday, I met a 77-year-old woman who'd lived in her home for 15 years. I met a couple caring for a sister with Down syndrome, both due for eviction today. Can I ask the Prime Minister to ask the courts to stop Section 21 evictions, to take the pressure off hard-pressed councils and these really worried families?
Mr. Speaker, she is absolutely right to raise this, and that's why I said what I did to the right honourable gentleman, and we will indeed be bringing forward legislation to address the point that she raises.
Bacon.
Mr. Speaker, in my constituency of Orpington, we've enlisted the support of the voluntary sector providers to join the Council in providing support to the most vulnerable residents in combating the coronavirus. Can the Prime Minister confirm that local authorities like mine in Bromley, who are at the forefront of this, will be given clear guidance in respect to safeguarding and DBS checks for volunteers, as this will allow us to deploy more volunteers when and if the need arises?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, he's absolutely right, and that's why we're speeding up the DBS checks so they can be done in 24 hours. And I want to thank and congratulate all the boroughs throughout this country for the way they are harnessing those volunteers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister talked about supporting families, so can I ask him to show his solidarity for those households headed up by a single breadwinner with dependent children? Today is Day of the Single Parent Family. It was initiated by Ronald Reagan in 1984. Can I ask him to join the Right Honourable Member for Romsey and Southampton North, she's my friend in this, on the steps of Old Palace Yard immediately after this PMQ to show that old or young, Rich or poor, big or small, all families matter.
Well, I couldn't agree more powerfully more strongly with what the honourable lady has said. Whether I'll be able to join her, whichever venue she's identified, I'm not sure. I'll have to look at my diary. I think I have a date with you, Mr. Speaker.
Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Can I thank the Prime Minister and his team for the sure-footed way in which they are approaching this crisis? Given what's unfolding in northern Italy and the very real prospect of our brilliant NHS staff being overwhelmed in a matter of weeks, what age and comorbidity criteria are being drafted that will govern access to intensive care and to ventilators?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he raises a very important point, but this is one that is not unknown to the medical profession, and we will be relying on the clinical decisions of those medical professionals.
Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the matter of whatever it takes more than three-word slogans.
Yes.
Is what I would say to the Prime Minister. And in this case, it actually takes a bit of war socialism. We need to get money into the pockets of the workers. Has he seen EDM 302, which I've proposed, about bringing in a temporary universal basic income to support workers and get money where it's actually needed?
Exactly.
I hear the honourable gentleman loud and clear, and he's echoing a point that was already made by the leader of the SNP, and of course that is one of the ideas that will certainly be considered.
Theresa May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend is rightly engrossed day to day in dealing with the developments of COVID-19, but I'd like to ask him to cast his mind a little further forward. The Chief Scientific Advisor and the Chief Medical Officer have been clear that the best solution for this is a vaccine, but the Chief Scientific Advisor has said that that could be as much as a year away. He's also suggested that until that vaccine is available, it may be difficult to ease restrictions successfully. Does my right honourable friend agree with that analysis? And if so, what does a sensible exit strategy look like?
Mr. Speaker, the objective of the government and the objective of our scientific advisors is to depress the peak of the epidemic, to make sure that we get through it so that we come out on the other side, and that we do that as fast as possible. I'm not going to give and that's why we're taking all the measures that we've announced. That's why we've announced the package of business support that we have. I'm not going to give a timescale on it, but that is the strategy, and I'm absolutely certain that it will succeed.
Right, we come to presentation of Bill. Secretary Robert Jeremy. I'll take them after this. Okay. Minister to
Non-domestic rating public laboratories bill.
Second reading what day?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Presentation from Secretary Ben Wallace.
Overseas Operations Service Personnel and Veterans bill.
Second reading what day?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow. We now come to presentation of Bill Leila Moran.
Vagrancy repeal bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 12th of June.
Friday the 12th of June.
We've all been told socially distanced.
I'm just going to hand over now. Oh, I want to. Chris Bryant.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker. We had several bills just presented there, but the one bill that we have not yet had presented is the one that the government has talked about extensively, which is the emergency legislation for coronavirus. Now, it is talked of that it will be published tomorrow, and we'll be dealing with it on Monday. I just hope that there will be a process whereby it will be possible to table amendments before second reading, which is not the normal convention, of course, but is for emergency legislation. And I hope that it might be possible for us, for instance, if the government is seriously intending to say that this legislation will last for 2 years, that we'll be able to table amendments to suggest that that could only be with review from Parliament on a regular basis.
It is on the order paper, and I'm sure there will be time to table amendments, and that message will have been taken on board to ensure that that should be made available. Right, we now come to 10-minute rule motion. Bambush Lambers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision about children's access to medical treatment and for connected purposes. The recent case of Tafida Rakib was a sad example of a long line of disagreements over treatment of seriously ill children, which have ended up in court. In February of last year, Tafida, then aged 5, suffered a traumatic brain injury, which left her on a life support machine in a hospital in London. In autumn, and contrary to the wishes of her family, the hospital trust wanted to turn off her life support. Tafida's parents wanted to take her to Italy for further treatment, but this was challenged by the trust, who argued that it was in Tafida's best interest that she should not be taken out of the country, but instead be allowed to die. In a landmark High Court ruling in October, Tafida's parents won the right to take her to Genoa for medical treatment. Tafida was allowed to leave the UK, she received the medical treatment she needed, and just 9 weeks ago she was taken out of intensive care and is now breathing unaided. In another case in 2014, a young boy, a Shire King, who had a brain tumour, was taken abroad, contrary to the wishes of the local trust, for proton beam therapy, which was at the time not available in the UK. Ashai's parents were arrested in Spain for not acting in Ashai's best interest, but the High Court later ruled that he could receive the proton beam therapy in Prague. Following the therapy, which is now available in the UK, an MRI scan found that Ashai was now free of cancer. But not all cases have such successful outcome as these two examples. Following a breakdown in communication between the parents and medical professionals over an experimental treatment for mitochondrial disease, Mr. Page. These are just two of a number of cases where there is a disagreement ends up in expensive and intensive court proceedings, where judges have to make what should be an ethical decision about medical treatment. This is a fundamental flaw in the system that this bill tries to remedy. And it's clear to me that we do not have the appropriate support mechanisms in place to bring parents and doctors together at an early stage where there are disagreements about treatment, and to properly address difficult questions which may very well prevent these long, stressful and expensive court cases which are harmful to the child, parents, doctors and hospitals. In recent months I've met with Chris Gard and Connie Yates, the parents of Charlie, who tragically and in highly public circumstances passed away on the 28th of July 2017. Charlie was born with a rare genetic disorder, MDDS, that causes progressive brain damage and muscle failure. Following a breakdown in communication between the parents and medical professionals over an experimental treatment for mitochondrial disease, the hospital and Charlie Gard's parents entered into a lengthy and distressing dispute involving a series of court proceedings. The case went to the High Court, the Court of Appeal, Supreme Court, and even the European Court of Human Rights. The case was painful for all involved, the parents, the medical professionals working at the hospital where Charlie Gard received his treatment, and everyone else concerned. The case clearly illustrated problems with the current dispute resolution systems. The court proceedings caused enormous emotional harm and stress to both parents and medical professionals. Both wanted to do what they thought was best for Charlie. Instead of a smooth and efficient process aimed at resolving the conflict, what we saw was a huge entrenchment and precious time lost when Charlie's health was deteriorating. Worse, parents and medical professionals were pitted against each other in the full glare of media, and this helped no one. Since then, Connie and Chris have dedicated themselves to preventing the escalation of conflict and protecting the doctor-patient relationship. These conversations and my observations of a number of similar cases have led me to table this bill, and I'm pleased to say that I have support from honourable members from across the House, as well as doctors, including medical ethicists and former presidents of the British Medical Association and the wider public. Organisations such as the Medical Mediation Foundation are already active in trying to resolve disputes between parents and doctors in various medical settings. A study by the Centre of Health Economics from the University of York also shows that as well as saving time and taking the stress out of disputes, mediation could also save trusts money by resolving issues concerning treatment quicker and without the need for expensive proceedings. Broadly, the bill does 5 things, all geared towards addressing disagreements quickly and clarifying the legal situation so that cases are less likely to end up in court. First, it requires the Secretary of State to put in place measures to improve early access to mediation services in hospitals where conflict is in prospect. Mediation has been proven to be an effective way of re-establishing trust between parents and doctors and helping them work together to make the best decision for the child. But currently access to and take-up of mediation services is very low. Second, it provides access to appropriate clinical ethics committees so that both doctors and parents can be supported in making difficult decisions by impartial ethical experts. Very few hospitals have access to medical ethics committees, meaning that parents and doctors often face a postcard lottery when looking to get the appropriate ethical advice. This bill would put a provision in place for committees to come together quickly when required and ensure that doctors and parents do take the step of calling for a committee at an early stage when they're faced with difficult decisions. Third, the bill would provide the means necessary to obtain second medical opinions swiftly, ensuring that when requested, parents receive access to the child's full medical data so that those second opinions are fully informed. Fourth, it seeks to provide access to legal aid to ensure that families are not forced to employ costly legal representation or rely on outside interest groups in order to fund representation in the courts. Finally, the bill would create a new legal test of whether an alternative credible medical treatment could cause a child disproportionate risk of significant harm in order to decide whether a parent is able to seek that treatment for their child. This test would replicate the legal test already used by social services, considering whether to remove a child from their parents' care, and would sit before rather than replacing the current best interest test, which is very broad and can be subject to a number of different interpretations. The clarity brought by this test would in turn bring more certainty around the legal outcome of a legal decision and therefore prevent cases from ending up in court. It is my view and the consensus view of medical ethics that if a treatment is not harmful and reputable doctors are willing to provide it, that no one should be prevented from seeking this treatment, and the new test of disproportionate risk of significant harm aims to clarify this. Most of all, the underlying aim of this bill is to prevent conflict between doctors and parents and help support them as they work together during the very stressful and upsetting situations. Conflicts are bad for doctors, they're bad for parents, bad for our NHS and bad for the children whose care is under consideration. The frequency of these cases and obvious distress it causes all parties have led me to believe that the legal system in this regard is in desperate need of reform. I hope my parliamentary colleagues will agree with me on this. I commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As members of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Seema Malhotra, Emma Hardy, Sir Roger Gale, Preet Kaur Gill, Ruth Cadbury, Brenda Sharma, Sir David Amos, Tim Loughton, Kerry McCarthy, Kate Holland, Tayo Owotemi, and myself.
Bambos Sharalambo. Here, here.
Children, Access to Treatment Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday, the 27th of November.
Friday, the 27th of November. We now come to the first Opposition Day motion on statutory sick pay and protection of workers, and I call Margaret Greenwood to move.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is an international crisis and one where countries need to learn from each other about what is working and what additional steps need to be taken. We also need to come together as a country to support each other as the severity of the crisis is becoming clearer. A Public Health England document estimates that the coronavirus epidemic in the UK will last until this time next year and could lead to almost 8 million people being hospitalised. The impact will be felt not just by those who become ill or have to self-isolate. This public health crisis has really exposed the fault lines in an economy in which insecure, low-paid work is so prevalent. In the budget last week and again yesterday, the Chancellor announced measures to support business, but there was a glaring omission when it came to workers on low income and those who are unable to work. Public Health England warns that it is estimated that at least 10% of people in the UK will have a cough at any one time during the months of peak COVID-19 activity. The revised health advice is that anyone with a cough should self-isolate for at least 7 days and for 14 days if they live with other people. It is right that people should not go on working when they're not well, but the government's measures so far still leave many people facing a cruel choice between their health and financial hardship, and it's a choice which has impacts on the health of the people they come into contact with too. In response to the Leader of the Opposition questions, the Prime Minister said he would bring forward a package of measures relating to statutory sick pay. We really do need the details on that as a matter of urgency.
On that point, I thank my honourable friend for giving way. To actually claim statutory sick pay, workers need to prove that they are earning a minimum of £118 per week. So does my honourable friend agree that rather than just regurgitating vacuous sound bites like whatever it takes, the government actually needs to bring the statutory sick pay levels to European levels from the current paltry £94.25 a week, which isn't enough to even feed one's family, and they need to extend it to all workers?
My friend makes a couple of really important points about the levels of pay and about the people that are able to access it, and I'll be coming on to those things in my speech. So just under 7 million people are not eligible for statutory sick pay. So that's just under 2 million workers on low income who don't qualify because they earn less than the £118 a week on average. And then there are 5 million self-employed people who don't qualify either. Now, those on low pay are some of the people who will be hit hardest by the crisis. Many work in retail, hospitality and leisure, and we're also hearing of people being laid off in these sectors. Others will be concerned that their jobs may be at risk, and these anxieties could also make them more likely to carry on working even if they are unwell. There are nearly 1 million people on zero-hour contracts. An analysis by the TUC found that the earnings of around a third of them do not meet the threshold for statutory sick pay, compared to 6% of permanent employees, and women figure highly in the numbers of on zero-hour contracts, and around 70% of the women who would benefit from the overall, around 70% of workers who would benefit from the removal of the threshold are women. A government consultation published last year highlighted that workers who do not earn enough to qualify for statutory sick pay may be working when unwell. It said that the government believed that there was a case to extend eligibility for statutory sick pay to people earning less than the threshold. So will the government now extend statutory sick pay to all workers, including those on low pay? Along with the just under 2 million whose earnings are too low to qualify, there are others on low income in the gig economy who are not eligible because they're classified as self-employed. These include care workers, cleaners and delivery drivers, the very people who we will be depending on to an even greater degree than usual over the coming weeks and months, as people have to self-isolate in greater numbers. My honourable friend, the member for Dulwich and West Norwood, has rightly highlighted in a letter to the government signed by 100 colleagues that while NHS England has issued guidance advising trusts to give full sick pay to staff who have to self-isolate because of the disease, care workers on zero-hour contracts will not be protected. Now, they make up a quarter of the social care workforce. Will the government ensure that they also qualify for full sick pay? In the case of delivery drivers, the GMB has worked with Hermes to agree on a fund to protect the income of drivers who fall sick who have to self-isolate. But there are other examples of companies offering derisory payments or even requiring drivers to continue to meet the cost of renting vans even while they receive sick pay. It shouldn't need emphasising how important it is that people in occupations going from one house to another should not go on working when unwell. We depend on people like carers and drivers. The government has a responsibility to protect them if they're unable to work because of the outbreak. There is also a case to extend statutory sick pay to the self-employed more generally, as the Irish Government has done. Many people who are disabled, who have been ill, for example, choose self-employment because of the flexibility that it can give them to choose hours that are manageable. However, they also may be now more vulnerable to the virus. The level of statutory sick pay is far too low at only £94.25 a week, so that even those who do qualify for it are likely to struggle to keep on top of even basic household bills. Average weekly earnings are currently £512, meaning that the average worker who has to self-isolate for 14 days will see their income fall by over £850 during that time. I will give way.
The Honourable Member for giving way, and I wonder if she's aware that research that the Institute for the Future of Work have undertaken absolutely backs up everything she's saying about putting that statutory floor into place so that people are able to economically contribute when it is right for them to do so, and that there is much more resilience within the general population, and they have more ability to work when they are fit to do so when that kind of measure is in place.
Absolutely. The Honourable Lady makes a really excellent point, and I thank her for it. Many workers on low pay are unlikely to have savings to fall back on either. 48% of workers in a recent YouGov survey said they wouldn't be able to cover their rent or mortgage and other living expenses if they had to take 2 weeks off work at the current statutory sick pay rate. European Committee of Social Rights found in January of 2018 that statutory sick pay and social protections for the unemployed, sick and self-employed people in the UK were manifestly inadequate. A worker in the UK on the national minimum wage who has to self-isolate will receive less than a third what they would in Germany and less than half the level in Sweden or the Netherlands. The level of statutory sick pay is also set lower than the national living wage, which the government said in the budget it wants to increase. So will the government raise statutory sick pay to at least the level of the real living wage so that people are not pushed into poverty by doing the right thing? The government's approach has been to say people on low income who are not eligible for statutory sick pay can claim universal credit or New Style ESA. That is not the answer. Universal credit acts as a vehicle for cuts, and the level of support is simply too low. The 4-year benefits freeze will only come to an end in April, and as a result, families living in poverty have been left £560 a year worse off on average. So will the government raise the level of social security payments in order to build resilience in people facing the virus? The 5-week wait for payment of universal credit means there will remain a risk that people will go on working when unwell. The government says people can request an advance, but advances are loans that have to be paid back, often on top of other debts built up during that period. So will the government commit to ending the 5-week wait, and will they change the loan into non-repayable advance? The truth is that people have often have to rely on food banks to survive, as well as advances during the first 5 weeks, and often after that as deductions are made from their universal credit when it finally does arrive. However, there's reports that panic buying by the public is leading to food banks running short. People using food banks can't afford to stock up, and so disadvantaged still further. The government should be taking measures to protect people in poverty in the current situation. Will the government immediately suspend deductions from social security for anyone who becomes ill or is forced to self-isolate, and consider suspending them for all other claimants? Will the government suspend work search requirements for anyone directly affected by the virus? And will the government suspend all sanctions? In the budget, the Chancellor also suggested that some people who become ill but don't qualify for statutory sick pay could claim New Style ESA. That's £73.10 a week, even lower than statutory sick pay. Someone who is ill as a result of the coronavirus or for any other reason should not be pushed into poverty and left worrying about how they will cope financially in addition. So will the government raise the level of New Style ESA payments? Even to get that, someone has to have built up a contribution record over the past 2 years, which people in insecure work in particular may find difficult to do. The government announced it was temporarily suspending face-to-face assessments for sickness and disability benefits. That is welcome as far as it goes, and we've been highlighting the major problems with the way that assessments are carried out on this side of the House for a long time. But the government has said that it would be replaced by telephone or paper-based assessments. That could risk increasing pressure on GPs at a time when they are already overrun. So can the government tell us clearly how assessments will be carried out during the current outbreak? Media reporting of the virus highlighted that most at risk had underlying health conditions. What is the government's response? Therefore, to Mind's call for all reassessments to be suspended to give people security of income at this time. What action will the Secretary of State take to protect people who care for a loved one who was already ill or disabled before the crisis began? Neither person may be directly affected by the virus, but attending a job centre could leave the carer at greater risk of contracting the virus. The truth is that Social Security changes aimed solely at people who are self-isolating or ill will not be enough. There will be other people affected by the crisis. The government has said it will suspend the minimum income floor in universal credit for self-employed people directly affected. Will it also suspend the minimum income floor for all workers, given that many will be affected as a result of the crisis and the impact on the economy? The demands on DWP
Are you ready, ladies? The Global Lady to Lady Conference is back. And when ladies gather together, changes happen. The Global Lady to Lady Conference is live in London at Fairfield Concert Hall, Croydon, Saturday the 21st of March. That's Fairfield Concert Hall, Park Lane, Croydon, CR9. Doors open at 9:30 a.m. for a 10 a.m. start. Register free at ladytoladyglobal.org or call 020 3983 9394.
Jerusalem, Jerusalem, land of glory, Jerusalem, holy land, and they visit to Jerusalem.
These are the things that have been written, and we are bearing witness to them as being true. This is an opportunity for you to visit Israel, Mount Nebo in Jordan, the ground where God spoke to Moses, showing him the promised land and the holy land of Jerusalem. 10 days visit to see for yourself the places which you have read in the Bible, like Elah Valley, where David defeated Goliath, Mount Nebo, Sea of Galilee, Canaan, where Jesus turned water to wine, River Jordan, where John the Baptist baptized Jesus Christ, Joseph and Maria House in Nazareth, Jericho, the Dead Sea, the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus prayed, Lazarus' tomb, King David tomb in Jerusalem, the house where Jesus and his disciples had their Last Supper, the Pentecost Upper Room, and so on. Our office is at Albert Basins, South Dockland, London, E16 7QY. For more info, please visit www.holytrinitypilgrimage.co.uk or please call Captain Mother Hassan on 078 721 37953 or Pastor Elijah Kamui on 079 846 34898 or email us info@holytrinitypilgrimage.co.uk. A pilgrim is not a tourist. The tourist sees sights and returns home the same person, but the pilgrim gains insights and returns home changed and spiritually fulfilled.
Jerusalem.
Everybody in London, have you heard that Heritage Television has come up with something new? All your functions and celebrations can now be multi-camera live stream that was only reserved for the rich and famous. Having a function in London can be viewed clean and clear immediately from any part of the world. Trust Heritage TV to give you a better reach. Heritage Television also does photography that will make you the envy of all your friends and family. Heritage Television is the best. All your functions like birthdays, funerals, weddings, church anniversaries or harvest. Heritage Television is the master. We are in the heart of London with an ultra-modern equipped studio. You can call us on 020-800-46100 or email us info@heritagetv.co.uk or mobile 0734 1234 560. Heritage Television will do you proud.